My name's Greg Knapp. This is the Greg Knapp Experience, your 20-minute thrill ride for your commute or your workout. I've got the real reason you were right not to trust the media. Biden's vaccine mandate gets shredded by the court. Does the Biden administration actually want high gasoline prices? Wait till you hear what the press secretary says about that. And why is our State Department fighting a ban on Chinese products made with slave labor? All that and an update on what's going on with the National School Board and the White House. And it's all coming up on the Greg Knapp Experience. Let's go. All right, so let's start with something from Andrew Sullivan that it's so good that it came from somebody like Andrew Sullivan because he's not a conservative, so they can't just kind of throw this away. Oh, it's just conservatives complaining about the media. No, this guy was a big Obama guy. He's really a classical liberal, and he's kind of like Bill Maher, where they're pointing out how the far left has gone too far and how the wokeism is out of control, right? So he's not a far lefty, but he's certainly not a conservative. He's a big-time consumer of the mainstream media that is, of course, leaning left and leaning till it's almost falling over, and he's pointing this out now. This article that he wrote, it's called When All the Media Narratives Collapse. In case after case, the United States mainstream media just keeps getting it wrong, is something we've been saying, and you've been saying for years, maybe even decades now, and there's finally some people on the left who are admitting it. Now, the mainstream media still doesn't want to admit it. Oh, no, we have no bias. Oh, for the millionth time, we don't have any bias. We just tell you the news. Except, especially since Trump was president, there are more and more people in the media admitting that, well, we can't just tell, both sides of the story. Sometimes these stories don't have both sides. And we've got to present these things so that the people understand just how dire it is and understand who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. We know. And you get to decide who the bad guy is, and you get to decide what truth is, and you get to decide what misinformation is, even though what you're doing is misinformation. And that's really the focus of what Andrew Sullivan is talking about. And really, as you read through this, and we're going to go through it at length here, all of the errors that the media is doing, case after case after case, the errors all hurt one side and help the other side. Now, if they were just errors because, sometimes you get things wrong. I mean, we're flawed human beings. You can't know the whole story when you first start reporting something. Totally get it. Wouldn't half the errors help one side and half the errors help the other side? No, not this way. All right, so here we go. Andrew Sullivan. When the sources of news keep getting things wrong and all the errors lie in the exact same direction, yep, that's what we talked about, and they're reluctant to acknowledge the error, yup, we have a problem. Yes, we do. So looking back over just the last few years, the record of errors, small and large, about major stories hard to deny. It's as if the more Donald Trump accused the mainstream media of being fake news, the more assiduously they try to prove him right. Yeah, welcome to the party, Andrew. We've been talking about this for years, and people like you have told us, oh, no, you guys are just ridiculous. There's no bias in the media. These mass deceptions have consequences. Yeah. So he goes right to the Rittenhouse case. I don't know if you've been paying attention to this one. It's a 17-year-old. It was in Kenosha, Wisconsin. There was a riot going on. He's running away from the riot, and people are chasing him. And he shoots and kills two of them and shoots a third in the arm. Well, if you listen to the media, you would think this kid just came here looking to kill people. But if you look at what's actually happened in the trial has shown that it sure looks like self-defense. And I got to tell you, when I first saw this story, when it first broke, back when the riot happened, I was like, what is this kid doing with the gun? And it's still not the stuff that if this had been my kid, I would have said, no, I don't want you going there. I don't want you taking a gun. But when you watch what happened at the trial, you're like, oh, wait a second. And if you watch the videos that are out there that show you what really happened, you're like, okay, wait a second. Now, I'm still not a big fan of the 17-year-old going there to begin with if it was my kid. However, sure does look like self-defense. And yet the media has pushed the opposite from day one. So, the Rittenhouse case. The impression many got from much of the media was that he was a far-right vigilante in the middle of race riots, and he'd gone looking for trouble far from home and injured one man, killed two in a shooting spree. Yeah, that is what the media said, and since I don't trust them, as soon as this happened, I was watching the video and go, okay, this doesn't look like a kid that just went there to shoot people. Here's the New York Times, August 26th, the morning after the killings. The authorities were investigating whether the white teenager who was arrested was part of a vigilante group. His social media accounts appeared to show an intense affinity for guns, law enforcement, and President Trump. Double. Rittenhouse's race is specified, as you notice, but the race of the victims are not. By the way, they're white too. Every person involved in this story is white, and yet immediately the New York Times tried to make it a race deal. Why? And there are still people trying to do that. We'll get to it in a minute. Notice how the narrative, embedded in a deeper one, that the Blake shooting, that was what started the Kenosha situation, was just as clear-cut as the Floyd murder, which of course it wasn't. Blake was armed, and the police were trying to stop him from taking children from the scene in a vehicle. That's a whole other story, but they tried to make it seem like somehow these cops were just shooting black people in the street, gunning them down. Doesn't matter if they're armed or not. Total nonsense. And they kept pushing the white supremacy angle that it's everywhere in America. So when this week, one of Rittenhouse's pursuers, Gage Grosskreutz, which we talked about last week, admitted on the stand that Rittenhouse shot him only after Grosskreutz pointed his pistol directly at Rittenhouse's head a few feet away, it came as a shock. Yeah, if you'd been reading the mainstream media, that would have been a shock. Except if you're reading the mainstream media, you probably still don't know that. Some are still lying about it. So the defense lawyer asked this: It wasn't until you pointed your gun at him, advanced on him with your gun and your hands down, pointed at him, that he fired, right? Grosskreutz answered, correct. Yet here's how the New York Times first described this a year ago. Video footage from the scene of the shooting appears to show Mr. Rittenhouse running and then firing his gun, striking a man in the head. He then flees and is chased by bystanders before tripping, falling to the ground, and shooting another man. If you watch the video, there's no way that's how you describe that video. A day later, in another New York Times piece, Andrew Sullivan says that's the one he relied on at the time. Here's what they wrote about the video. As Mr. Rittenhouse is running, he trips and falls to the ground. He fires 4 shots as 3 people rush toward him. One person appears to be hit in the chest and falls to the ground. Another, who is carrying a handgun, is hit in the arm and runs away. Does that sound like self-defense? And when you watch the full version of the video, you see that for some reason, the New York Times video cut off the key moment showing Rittenhouse's self-defense. The moment that was so critical in court where the guy has to admit, yeah, I was aiming the gun at the guy's head when he shot me. And Andrew Sullivan goes back to the other important part of this. Because of that narrative whiplash, what the media tells you and what the truth is, we may have more rioting and violence if Rittenhouse is acquitted. The judge has already been targeted. And Sullivan says, I'm not defending Rittenhouse. I understand news gathering is fallible, but there's a media pattern here and it reaches far wider than Rittenhouse. I am defending Rittenhouse. He used self-defense. He has every right to. However, this is the key. Because of that narrative whiplash, we may have more rioting and violence if he's acquitted. Yes, the media has set it up that this should be an open and shut case, that this guy murdered people. There are people in the media saying he murdered people. Or somebody on The View last week, CBS actually reported murdered, and they had to retract it last week. If you prepare people to think that this guy murdered these people and then he's acquitted, well, here come the riots. And that's not what happened. And they've done it time and time again. It's just like the lack of proper coverage of what's going on with police and unarmed people. If they would show some of the unarmed white people who are shot and killed by police as frequently as they show the unarmed black people who are shot and killed by police, it might give a little bit of an idea that, hey, wait a second, maybe this isn't just this race thing where they're out to kill people. You realize more unarmed white people are killed every year by the police than unarmed black people. Yeah, but there are more white people. You're absolutely correct. There's a higher percentage of unarmed black people killed. However, again, if you look at the studies, if you look at the amount of interaction between police and suspects based on their ethnicity in violent situations, there's a much higher percentage of, in terms of the ethnicities, a higher percentage of black individuals who are engaged in those violent situations. You would actually expect more black people to be shot by police, not fewer of the current situation. But that is never talked about in mainstream media, because if you do, you're going against the narrative. You're going to be called all kinds of names. You're going to be called a racist. You're going to be deplatformed. You're going to be canceled. And instead what we get is this perception by people especially unfortunately people of color, that the police are there to shoot you. And you can't figure out why that's causing problems in the city. Now, there are bad cops, and those bad cops should be tried and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But the idea that they're systemically racist just waiting around to shoot black people is just not true, and it's causing all kinds of problems because of that narrative. So we get back to the Andrew Sullivan piece. I know this is long, but it's just wait, because it's getting even better. It's not just the Rittenhouse case. You look at the Steele dossier. We just find out a key figure, Igor Danchenko, indicted for lying to the FBI, working with the Clinton crony. Another source for the dossier, Sergei Millian, touted across all the media, including the Washington Post. Well, he has been exposed as giving fake information. And instead of a clear retraction, the Washington Post just added editor's notes to previous stories, removed sections in a video, and altered headlines retroactively. See, Trump was right in the end about the dodgy dossier. He was right about the duped FBI's original overreach, and the mass media, Rachel Maddow chief among them, were wrong. And yet the dossier dominated the headlines for 3 years, and the corrections have been a fraction of the audience of the errors. Maddow gets promoted, and the man who first published it, Ben Smith, made the media columnist for the New York Times. Yeah. And that's just scratching the surface. I was talking to my wife about this last week. She goes, I know it's an important story, but I'm kind of tired of hearing about it. I don't want to hear about it forever. Can't we move along? And she even understands how important it is. And that's what's happening, is people just want to move along, and we're missing. This is probably the biggest story ever for our government and our media, because it was an attempted soft coup on the presidency of the United States of America for 3 years. They propagated these lies. It was the Democrats, the media, and some people in our government all working together, and it almost worked. They almost got rid of Trump before his first term, and it did help him not have a second term, and it did severely hurt what President Trump could do during his first term, and he still did a lot. I mean, it is amazing. And now it's been shown that that is exactly what happened, and there are still people trying, no. Adam Schiff, no. He's still colluded with the Russians. No. And it's not just the Russian story. Here's some more. Narratives that the mainstream media pushed that we know now were unbelievably wrong. They viciously defamed the Covington boys, told us that bounties had been placed on U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan by Putin, told us the lab leak theory of COVID was a conspiracy theory with no evidence behind it at all, took the ludicrous story of Jussie Smollett seriously because it fit their white supremacy narrative, told us that a woman was brutally gang raped at the University of Virginia. That was invented. That the Pulse mass shooting was driven by homophobia. Untrue. The Atlanta spa shooter was motivated by anti-Asian bias. No evidence for that at all. Followed up with a story after story about white supremacists targeting Asian Americans. We find out disproportionately it was Black Americans who were doing that. The New York Times published a complete fiction that never had any evidence. From the January 6th event at the Capitol, Officer Sicknick's skull was savagely bashed in with a fire extinguisher by a pro-Trump mob until he died. Nope. Never hit with a fire extinguisher. Had nothing to do with Trump mob attacking him. The media told us an alleged transgender exposure in the Wee Spa in Los Angeles was an anti-trans hoax. Nope. Told us that the emails recovered on Hunter Biden's laptop were Russian disinformation. Nope. And of course, that was right before an election, which canceled that entire story. The mainstream media telling us for months now that inflation is, it's just a phantasm. It's transitory. Everything's fine. Any concern about that is fear-mongering politics, and now we have the highest inflation in 30 years. We were told that vaccines would end the COVID pandemic. Nope. Told that the migrant surge at the border was just seasonal. Nothing out of the ordinary, as 1.7 million migrants were illegally trying to get in. And told that sending migrants back to their home countries was wicked and cruel and unconscionable thing done by Trump, as the Biden administration was doing it with Haitian immigrants. Told by most of the media that critical race theory isn't in high schools at all, and we've got evidence that's out there that shows that it's absolutely in high school after high school after high school, and all the way K through 12. As Andrew Sullivan finishes this, he says, look, these are not randos tweeting false rumors. They are the established press. And at some point, you wonder, what narrative are they pushing now that is also BS? At some point, yeah, Andrew, welcome to the party. We've been telling you about this for years, even decades. I've been on radio talk shows for 21 years. I've been saying it since the day I started because I read all these different newspapers and I see the errors always going in the same way. And I see how liberal the bias is in the mainstream media. And when I talk about it, no, Greg, you're just too sensitive. Finally, some liberals are starting to show it and they're starting to admit it. There's a great article to show your lefty friend the next time he tells you there's no bias in the media. Wow. All right. Hey, in just a second, I'm going to tell you about Ben and Jerry spreading more misinformation about Kyle Rittenhouse. But I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to be part of this movement. I really need your help if you like the show in sharing it with other people. I mean, we just got started on this thing. I haven't spent any money on advertising. So, I don't know how many people are listening to this thing, and I want you to help me. If you could just tell others, 3 friends, to start listening to this and passing it around, we could really do something in pushing back on the left's narrative about America and rallying around what makes us exceptional. So please subscribe to the podcast wherever you can hear it, and it's everywhere, and then share it with 3 friends. You can like the Greg Knapp Experience Facebook page as well. That would be great. So thank you so much for being a part of the movement. Yeah, Ben and Jerry's getting in on the Rittenhouse thing. And they're out here saying this, quote, "The Rittenhouse trial displays yet again that our justice system is racist. How would this trial be going if he was a black 17-year-old that crossed state lines, illegally carrying an AR-15 and shot 3 white protesters?" Okay, wait a second. First of all, they're all the same color. They're all white, so that makes absolutely no sense. And I like what one person tweeted out. I said, hey, listen, if this would have actually been a black teenager and the 3 victims were black, just reverse the race on this entire thing, you wouldn't even write about it because it happens every day in Chicago and you don't seem to care. Oof, that one might leave a mark. Absolutely. So here's how wrong they got this, by the way. The Lake County State Attorney's Office released a statement October 13, 2020, clarifying that Rittenhouse never had possession of the firearm used during the Kenosha riots while he was in Illinois. So he did not cross state lines illegally carrying an AR-15 because he didn't cross state lines with it. And secondly, it wasn't an AR-15. It was a Smith & Wesson M&P 15 rifle. Yeah, but AR-15s they're more scary. And that fits the narrative better. Exactly right. Thank you, Ben and Jerry. Maybe you should just go back to making ice cream. Here's some good news. I love Virginia Lieutenant Governor-elect Winsome Sears, first black woman elected to statewide office in Virginia's history. She's in there now with the brand new governor, who's also a Republican, Youngkin. And she was talking to Fox News Sunday, and she said, guess what? People voted for me because they're tired of black against white and Asian against Latino. And she said they're tired of it, and they're tired of politicians who won't let the wounds of the past heal. Quote, "I've just always assumed whatever room I'm in, I belong. Whatever I want to pursue, it's mine for the taking. Nobody's denying that we don't want to hear all the history, least of all me. I certainly don't want the sins of the past to be repeated. We don't have to tear one person down in order to build another up. That's no way to be. That's not America." Oh, I'm loving this woman. She emigrated from Jamaica, formerly served as a U.S. Marine. She said, "Everything I've had to work for. No one gave me anything. Sometimes what happens to you isn't because you're black or because you're a woman. It's simply life." Excuse me. She said, some days you're the pigeon. Some days you're the statue. It's just life. And she responded to all the people who are on the left who are calling her names and saying she's just a mouthpiece for white supremacy. Yes, you heard that right. There are people on MSNBC saying she's just a mouthpiece for white supremacy. She has a black mouth, but when she opens it up, white supremacy comes out. Unbelievable, but that's what they're saying. And she said, I'm a big girl. I can handle it. It's a bunch of hypocrisy, but it's all right. She said, "I really want others to see me, especially the children, and say, well, if Winsome can do it, I can do it. Because I didn't do anything special except stay in school and study, and I never let anyone walk over me. And if they did, they didn't get a second chance." Man, oh man, I'm loving this woman. The problem, she can never be president, though, because she was born in Jamaica. But she can still do a lot of good in America. You don't have to be president. Federal appeals court just shredded the Biden vaccine mandate. Shredded it. First they started with a stay a week ago Saturday, but now they have blocked it. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. They said his vaccine mandate is staggeringly overbroad. Here's just a couple little quotes from the court. The mandate grossly exceeds OSHA's statutory authority. Rather than a delicately handled scalpel, the mandate is a one-size-fits-all sledgehammer that makes hardly any attempt to account for differences in workplaces and workers that have more than a little bearing on workers' varying degrees of susceptibility to the supposedly grave danger the mandate purports to address. And that's just the beginning. The mandate imposes a financial burden on the businesses by deputizing their participation in OSHA's regulatory scheme, exposes them to severe financial risk if they refuse or fail to comply, and threatens to decimate their workforces and business prospects by forcing unwilling employees to take their shots, take their tests, or hit the road. Now remember, the Biden administration still has been saying, you shouldn't wait, keep implementing the measure. Basically, we don't care what the court says. And I don't see why people aren't just like, people and Congress just up in arms over that. Now, the court halted the policy, scheduled to take effect January 4, ordered OSHA not to take any further steps to implement it and enforce it. But now, what's going to happen? There's a lot of different lawsuits. Is the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals going to have the final say? Probably not. We will keep you up to date on it. But the Wall Street Journal really dives into just how much the court took this apart. They took apart the OSHA mandate in every way, on constitutional grounds, statutory grounds, procedural grounds. The Constitution gives states, not the federal government, the police powers to regulate individual behavior to protect public health and safety, not the federal government. So the administration tried to circumvent that by going with OSHA because OSHA has an emergency temporary standard they could use, right? Because under law, OSHA can bypass for 6 months the notice and comment required by the Administrative Procedure Act to respond to emergencies if it determines, quote, employees are exposed to grave danger from exposure to substances or agents determined to be toxic or physically harmful or from new hazards, and that such a standard is necessary to protect employees from such danger. Well, see, there you go, COVID. No. OSHA failed to satisfy either condition according to the court because OSHA could not show exposure or even the presence of COVID at all covered workplaces. Its attempt to shoehorn an airborne virus, widely present in society and not life-threatening to most workers, into a neighboring phrase connoting toxicity and poisonousness is a transparent stretch. I mean, they're shredding this thing. They're shredding it. They said on the one hand, it covers employees regardless of the risk of exposure and doesn't exempt those with natural immunity. On the other hand, OSHA sets an arbitrary threshold of employers with 100 workers because they will be better able to administer and sustain the mandate. See, it's overbroad, it's underbroad. As for the alleged emergency justification, some 80% of adult Americans have already received at least one vaccine dose. The virus has been spreading in the U.S. for at least 20 months, so cannot be defined as a new hazard. And OSHA spent nearly 2 months writing the rule, which suggests it isn't a true emergency. I mean, just bam, 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 bam. And yet you'll still hear in the matrix, well, this court is overreaching. I mean, obviously, it's emergency. Obviously, OSHA has the power to do it. Just watch it. It goes right back to Andrew Sullivan at the beginning of the show today. Meanwhile, did you know this? If I asked you, what does the Centers for Disease Control say on how many unvaccinated Americans with natural immunity have spread COVID-19? I mean, what do you think the number on that would be? You know, I mean, you got sick, you recovered, so you've got natural immunity from COVID now, but you didn't get vaccinated, and then you got sick again, and then you spread it to somebody. How many people do you think did that according to the CDC? Well, it's a trick question because the CDC doesn't keep track of that. Yeah, a Freedom of Information Act request filed by attorney Elizabeth Brem found that out because she asked that question, and they go, oh, we don't collect that information. So wait, you're telling us that unvaccinated people who have gotten sick are a danger, and yet you are not even tracking how many of these people actually got sick again and passed it on? Yeah, that's right. We don't track that. Isn't that nice? That's just super duper. Jen Psaki, by the way, was asked, she's the White House press secretary. She was asked about what President Joe Biden's going to do to bring down the cost of heating, energy, oil, and also gas prices for your car. Here's her answer. Look, our view is that the rise in gas prices over the long term makes an even stronger case for doubling down on our investment and our focus on clean energy options. So we are not relying on the fluctuations and OPEC and their willingness to put more supply and meet demand in the market. You got that? Now, here's how I interpret that. They want high gas prices. They like high gas prices because they think it's going to force you and force the entire American society to say, we want electric cars. We want electric cars. We can't stand these high gas prices anymore. Get those electric cars coming and put more electric gas stations all around the country. And we want the new Green Deal. They think this is going to force you to buy into their stuff. And they don't really care how much money it costs. That's how I interpret it. How about you? The White House has, of course, repeatedly rejected the option of drilling more oil in the United States and reversing all the things Biden has already done to undercut what Trump did when we were the #1 producer of gas and oil in the world. And if you remember, your gasoline price was around $2 a gallon. Psaki also classified rising inflation as now a political cudgel. A lot of talk about inflation it's become a political cudgel. And it shouldn't be. It's impacting, as you said, millions of Americans. In other words, you guys got to quit asking about inflation because you're trying to make it a political cudgel when it's really hurting people. That's why we're asking about it. It's hurting people. Well, you're just trying to make it look like it's Biden's fault. Yeah. It sure has a lot to do with his policies. Zachary Stieber reported that President Joe Biden's administration has just announced it is raising Medicare premiums. But, it's not Joe's fault. It's because drug costs are going up. Yeah. Watch for the mainstream media reports on Medicare premiums going up, and please email me if any one of them blames Biden. Now, if it was happening under Trump, it might be a little bit different. Yeah. Sean Morin reports that the banking nominee from President Biden, Ms. Omarova, spoke at the Law and Political Economy Project's, and it's called Law and Political Economy, Democracy Beyond Neoliberalism, end quote. That was in March. She said some very interesting things. She discussed one of her papers that was just a thought experiment. The People's Ledger, how to democratize money and finance the economy. It will help redesign the financial system and make the economy more equitable for everyone. She said it would change the private-public power balance. And what did she call for? Eliminating all private bank accounts. Eliminating all banks. Transferring all bank deposits to Fed accounts at the Federal Reserve. She said there will be no more private bank accounts, and all the deposit accounts will be held directly at the Fed. Her proposal would give the Fed more proactive monetary policy tools, things like helicopter money. And she pondered how the Federal Reserve could take money from Americans during an inflationary environment, to bring down inflation, like today. But hey, it's just a thought experiment, all right? You guys just got to back off and make it sound like she's some kind of crazy radical. Just because she's from the former Soviet Union and won the Lenin Scholarship and all this kind of stuff, you act like it's a horrible... No, the problem is that she still likes the old Soviet ways. She brags about the old Soviet ways. And she thinks this is the answer. And she thinks this thought experiment, by the way, is a good one that she would like to try. Meanwhile, how about this one? Climate czar John Kerry is actually fighting a ban on the import of Chinese goods made by slave labor. See, the Chinese are using the Uyghur Muslims as slave labor. And so we've pushed something through the Senate that passed, by the way, by voice vote, but it's held up in the House. It would target China's slave labor. But see, that touches on their production of solar panels and other equipment that we would need to grow more green energy sources. So here's climate czar John Kerry lobbying the House to oppose that legislation. He said, it might hurt our relations with China. It might make it harder to get these solar panels. Okay, so all we hear is how horrible America's been with slavery. And it's true. We have a horrible history of slavery in this country until we ended up with a great history of fighting it, overcoming it, and moving forward. But yes, we have a horrible history of slavery. So this Joe Biden administration now wants to fight a ban on slave labor produced from China. Is it the wrong kind of slaves? Is there something we're missing here? Slave labor. Which part of this do you not understand that you should be fighting? And they're instead fighting the law to stop the imports of those products made by slave labor. I mean, slave labor is bad, but solar panels. Tyler O'Neill pointing out the National School Board Association Remember when they wrote that letter that said that some of these parents are out of control, and they tried to analogize them to domestic terrorists, and it went to the Department of Justice, and now the Department of Justice, we need to investigate what's going on here, and they had a big old row about it. Well, now we find out from Fox News and emails that were given to them that the National School Board Association coordinated with the White House and the Department of Justice before sending Biden the letter. Emails provided showed they coordinated with the White House for weeks before that, and it looks like Attorney General Merrick Garland didn't tell the truth in his testimony to Congress on October 27. Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat of Illinois, asked Garland if he had second thoughts about what he did following the National School Board apologizing for the letter. And Merrick Garland said the Department of Justice memorandum did not rely upon the letter. Well, here's the email showing that they worked for weeks together. Well, that wasn't all from the letter, though. See, that's I didn't lie. It was we didn't rely primarily on the letter. Here's the good news: 4 parents with no political experience won school board seats in a Cincinnati, Ohio suburb, campaigning against critical race theory and against mask mandates. Pretty good stuff. It looks like we're starting to push back. My name's Greg Knapp. This is the Greg Knapp Experience.